we don't understand faith. I don't know when it happened. I was looking up the definition for faith, and oftentimes what they write is that faith is equated with the absence of proof. Faith is equated right now. If you look it up, usually, in the definition from Wikipedia pops up. One of the definitions will be belief in something in the absence of proof. And I think it might be because of the rise of the power, maybe, of science. Science is often equated with proving something with proof. You observe, you measure, you document everything. You have to run experiments over and over again to make sure in a controlled situation that this is right. When I do this happens instead. Proof. And someone else needs to be able to prove the same thing in their labs to make sure that it is right. But in contrast to this, and science has been so powerful for us and to make this world a better place in a lot of ways, but in contrast, faith oftentimes has been run over. And I think certain ways of reading Scripture, the way we've read Scripture, against some of the proofs that science sometimes comes against Scripture, some of our responses have been challenged. We have been challenged in the way we think of the origin of life, the age of the earth, and sometimes the way we respond kind of deserves some of the skepticism that, those Christians, in spite of all of the evidence and all the proof, still believe X, Y, or Z. Still believe, in contrary to all the proof out there, that this is the case. Those religious types, they just bury their head in the sand. They believe completely and utterly without a shred of evidence. They just bury their head in the sand. And all such criticism, is all too often justified. We have fought against what is actually true in many cases because we consider this faith so important to us. But we fight sometimes, I believe, the wrong battles. Now, earlier in the book of Hebrews, there is this definition of faith. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. And that sounds sort of the same thing. It sounds bad in light of the proofs of science, but I believe this passage redeems faith. It gives faith a good name. It's not faith in the absence of proof, but it's proof, just a different kind of proof. There is a fullness of faith here. Let's pray as we begin. Lord, help us see our truth through Jesus Christ, who is the truth. Amen. Once more, the definition of faith is defined by the writer of Hebrews. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And then we have this long list of examples of faith in action, and a sermon could be preached on each one of these little snippets of people of faith throughout history. It starts with the great exodus through the sea, as we've read today in this passage from the liturgy of the church calendar that we're reading today. The Israelites were released from slavery after miraculous signs from God, but Pharaoh changed his mind, pursued them, and the people were trapped between the Red Sea and this army. When you read the passage, the people don't seem to have much faith. In Exodus 14 we read, they said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out here? To die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this the very thing we told you in Egypt? Let us alone and let us serve the Egyptians." Let's go back to slavery. So much. For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. And Moses gives them this stirring speech. Don't worry, God's going to deliver, just wait. And then he turns to God, and God's like, why do you keep talking, Moses? Just tell him to move on. Tell him to keep going. God made a way for this fairly faithless people. They had to step into it. The waves parted, but they still had to trust through the waves being parted that this is not going to come back down, right? The God who made a way already will continue to make a way. So even despite their lack of faith, God still made a way, and they needed to step in, move on. Stop doing nothing and do something. They were certain of God's sustaining action of the miracle and walked through. But this one instance of faith does not belong in a vacuum. The Israelites were not told that the day of deliverance to believe in the power of some deity that they had never heard of. You know, this was the work of God who had displayed not just one miracle, but 10 different signs through their time in Egypt, through their deliverance in Egypt. This is the God who protected them from death during the Passover, the God who met them on Mount Sinai in fearsome glory. This is a God, in other words, with a history, a long history. Even when God approaches Moses after seemingly a long absence, he says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. He's making this connection. I'm not just this new God that's revealing revealed to you in this burning bush. I am the God that you know of through history, and I'm going to continue to carry you through. That is the faithfulness of God through centuries. In Hebrew, there's this word hesed, which is very hard to translate into English, loving kindness in some of the older translation, covenant faithfulness, that God has made a pact with us and God will see it through no matter what. It means God hasn't just started being God, but God has been God and will be God throughout the centuries, throughout millennia. So, in my mind, no faith was never a belief in the absence of proof. Indeed, Paul makes an argument in 1 Corinthians 15 that if Jesus didn't raise from the dead, then Christianity is pitiful. We shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be wasting our time. But if it's true, and then Paul actually lists the people that the risen Jesus appeared to as if to say, here's the proof. Go talk to them. They've experienced it. Some of them have died, some of them have passed away, some of them are asleep, but many of them are still alive, so it's provable. We have something to stand on, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, and this is a cornerstone of our faith. Unlike Islam or Mormonism or other religions where one person receives a divine message and you have to trust in that one person, Christianity has had many witnesses, a plurality of witnesses, public witnesses that people can talk to. And zooming out over a larger period of time, when we take the Jewish scriptures into account, we have hundreds upon hundreds of years, multitudes of different authors and prophets all saying the same thing, that God is our God. And God continues to prove himself over and over again in faithfulness. With all of that, there's a remarkable singular message of who God is. It's amazing. There's no absence of proof. There's actually in this passage an abundance of it. I mean, whoever picked these passages, cut off a bunch of other people that could be listed in Hebrews 11. There's an abundance of proof. It's just not measured in the way we normally measure. It's not a scientific proof. It's more of a historical proof. Now, history is much different than science. The way we do history as a science is different from, I guess, the sort of hard sciences. George Washington crossed the Delaware on December 15th to attack on the 26th. He didn't just cross Delaware once, but he had to go back, so he crossed it twice, and then he attacked later on the next year again. So there's a repetition, right? But not a scientific repetition, like in a lab. Each time he crossed the Delaware meant something different in that. History functions differently as proof. In fact, I think in this passage we realize that we get in trouble when we think of the faithfulness of God sort of scientifically. That this is the way God does it, and it will always be the same. Like, didn't Moses get into some big trouble because of this? Before they're wandering in the wilderness and they're thirsty and they're saying again, why did you bring us out here to die of thirst? And God says, okay, Moses, go strike that rock. And then Moses goes and strikes the rock and water comes out and this miracle, wonderful. Later on, they're thirsty again, and God says, speak to the rock. And what does Moses do? He strikes the rock. That's what he did before. And it still worked the second time. miraculously. And that was the whole reason Moses didn't go into the promised land, because he was disobedient in that. He didn't listen to God about speaking to the rock instead of hitting the rock. He was doing more of a scientific thing. It works. Hitting rocks with the staff makes water, so I'm just going to do that. It's the same thing. But God does. Where else has God told people to hit rocks? In the conquest accounts, they're supposed to walk around Jericho, right? Many times. The next city, do they walk around? No. Every time in the history of God, God is calling obedience, people to obedience. God is not some slot machine or some mechanism that if you do this, God will pop out this thing. He's a God of relationship, of connection. He's a person. And so there's this communication of do it this way, and at this time I will show you the results, but I can't do it every time. We get in trouble with this all the time with when we give advice to one another. I can tell you how I met my wife, but that might not work for you. That God might be calling you to a different way, and always a different way. And this is the tricky thing about faith. As we are reading through this, there is a lot of victory, right? The mouths of lions are shut. Kingdoms have been conquered. And you think, yes, this is faith. And we hear in our American culture some of these ideas of faith. If you have enough faith, you can get the biggest house you can dream of. You can get all the boats you need. If only you had faith, then all the riches of God will just be poured out upon you. But notice, there's this shift between verses 34 and 35. 34 stops with, become mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Yes, victory, yes. Verse 35, women received their dead by resurrection. Yes. Others were tortured. Oh. Faith is not always receiving what you want. Faith is not always the victory. Refusing to accept release in order to obtain a better resurrection, verse 36. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned to death. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. Faith does not always get in this lifetime. In fact, if you study the concept of resurrection in the Bible, people were struggling with the fact that there were martyrs. People weren't sure of what would happen after they died. You hear David talking about going down to Sheol, into this dark and gloomy place that no one really wanted to go. There wasn't really that much of an understanding of resurrection as you read through the Old Testament. But especially in terms of the captivity and other things, the people of God started to wrestle with. God is faithful. We know God's faithful. God has brought us through the wilderness. We celebrate the Exodus. We celebrate Passover all the time. We know God is with us, but our lives are ending. We're losing these battles. We're dying before the victory is given. So if God is the God who breathed life into us as dust in the beginning, when we return to dust, could God not breathe life into us once again? So that one day justice will really be established. Because right now, our lives are ending and justice is not good. The evil are winning. They're conquering us and hurting us. There has to be more to it. It is in this long history where faith is fleshed out. The ancients did not receive fullness, and neither do we, and neither do our children or our children's children, but all together we will. I love this. They didn't receive what was promised because together with us, and together with those who will come, together we're made perfect. It's not just about this congregation. It's not just about this church that has 2 congregations. It's not just about this denomination or this country. It's the church through centuries. The church all across the world. Together, in faith, we are made perfect. In Gundor's song, We Are Stronger, there is a celebration of difference, knowing that actually we need each other. We need each other. We're more politically divided. I just read an article saying, or a guy was talking, we're more politically divided than even during the Civil War right now. The way we voted is crazy. We're just so separate. In that song, We Are Stronger, it's saying we need each other. We might not see eye to eye, but I can hold your hand in mine. We need each other. We need this dialogue. Together, we're made perfect. And so the writer of Hebrews ends with this rallying cry. Since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely. And let us run with perseverance the race set before us. As I read this, I don't know, anyone else sort of addicted to the Olympics? Olympic viewership is way down, apparently, so maybe the 5 of us or 6 of us are the only ones watching, but yeah, I'm addicted to it. I love watching it. I love the competition. I love those opening ceremonies. And in the opening ceremonies is not some older, former, glorious athlete the one to light the torch, right? To go before. And all of these witnesses are gathered together. Some spectators, others athletes are all in the stadium watching this person light the torch. And I feel like, that this Hebrews passage is sort of this Olympic image of Jesus Christ going before and saying, this is glory, this is goodness. I'm lighting the torch, and everyone else is watching and getting ready for this great competition, this great race, all of these people cheering themselves on. In fact, I hate watching when someone is competing for the Olympics and there isn't a full stadium. It bothers me. It's like, okay, yes, it's archery, and maybe not too many people want to buy tickets to watch archery, but we need a crowd. We need a crowd of witnesses. I went to the University of Illinois. We never had a really good football team, and I never saw that stadium packed, ever. But when you see a good team, the stadium's packed, the stadium's roaring. It's crazy. It's such an amazing experience. I saw Michael Phelps race the other day, and there in the audience was Kevin Durant. And I was like, wow, Kevin Durant. Does Kevin Durant care about competitive swimming ever? Except for it's now the Olympics. And here's Kevin Durant, NBA superstar, makes tons and tons of money, cheering on a fellow Olympian, a fellow American, in a sport that he probably doesn't care about. There's just this amazing picture of people united around this different identity. I'm always amazed at the Olympics because, again, we have all these NBA superstars who are normally fighting against one another in NBA finals and everything. Now they come together and are united as one people representing the United States. We as Christians represent one thing, one person, Jesus Christ, who says, for the joy set before him, for that gold medal, Jesus didn't find pleasure or pain in the cross, but he knew what was coming. He knew what would come on the other side of that pain, and because of that, he could endure this perseverance, this pain. All of these athletes go through great pain, but for the joy, for hearing their national anthem played through the speakers there. We are surrounded by witnesses who have come before. We have a race to run, and our pace setter is Jesus Christ, who endured pain for the promise of future hope and joy. And it is in light of that history of those who have come before, those who will come after, that we strive towards that as well. Never finding it on our own, but in faith, hoping for it together. Let us pray. Lord, help us to have an imagination, to know that glorious though the Olympics are, there is such a greater grace that each life in this room represents. There is a glorious, not competition, Lord, but long distance race We have to pace ourselves, we have to prepare, we have to train. Lord, help us to see that. Help us to train just as hard as those athletes, Lord, to live lives worthy of the calling of those who follow Jesus. Help us, as this passage says, to take off all that gets in the way, just as athletes have to wear special clothing to race. Lord, help us to strip our lives free of the sin that slows us down, that we might run this race well. May we give glory to you, our pace setter, our pioneer. May we endure the pain of this life